Hello and welcome back to the third installment of Let's Play Europa Universalis 3. Hopefully this time I will wrap up the overview and explanation of the menus of the game. Keep abruptly stopping there. A couple of things have come up each time and I just decided to stop recording in lieu of an explanation, but we just got through explaining the advisors at the top and we've already gone over the map modes, so a couple of quick things, and then let's go ahead and start actually playing. One final piece of reference that is highly important is the ledger. Access it here in the bottom right corner. This is a dynamic ledger, essentially, but there's a lot of information on here that really would not have been at all available to a country actually from this time. But to you, the player, it is an invaluable source of information. If you're playing the game multiplayer, the ledger is actually, for the most part, blank. For instance, you can sort every country in the entire world by their annual income, and you have that number to a T. In multiplayer, you don't get to see that. You don't get to see... In fact, income might be shown, but you don't get to see... What's most useful here is the total standing army of every nation in the world. Playing single player, this is highly important to make reference of, but as we can see here, every country is ranked here. You can sort them by infamy. At the start of the game, no one has any infamy. Prestige, legitimacy, stability, inflation, annual income, trade efficiency, production efficiency, and papal influence, and that's just the first page of 32 pages. So you can sort by technology, the full slew of advisors that exist in the world, their skill level, their types, who their employer is, the best leaders in the world, and in this case it's generals, the Holy Roman Emperors. As they die and new ones are elected, they will be chronicled here. Armies, as was said, the total strength, the manpower pool of each country, and then the respective breakdown of their standing army. Same with navies. In your own country, as you gain and lose provinces, it'll chart that here. Your own country, the overview by province, your own previous rulers. This can be handy if you have a large empire. It will list all of your provinces by building type, and you can sort by which buildings don't exist in certain provinces. Some buildings are virtually essential to have, so this is a convenient point of reference to find where you need to construct certain essential buildings, as is the map mode we looked at earlier. Province decisions, colonies, you can see pie charts of your religious solidarity, your cultural solidarity, what portion of your provinces are core provinces versus not core, and what resources they all produce. Technology overview, a breakdown of your, really each major category of technology, what they enable you. Government tech, we have government tech enabling one idea, production tech with this level of efficiency achieved, etc. Your national armies, we'll get into that in a moment. Navies, regiments by their stats, ships, and then here's an overview of your income broken down into category. Since this is the very beginning of the game, there's not really any data for most of this. But if we were, say, 1 year into the game, we could see what our census tax was last year as opposed to this year. Well, rather, 2 years in, we could see a comparison over 2 years. Taxes, tariffs, subsidies in war, production, etc. A lot of this is a little bit more nitty-gritty than you need most of the time, but if you have a specific question that requires you to dig into a couple of specific factors, you have a very useful chart to approach that question with. Likewise for costs, your advisors, army maintenance, bribes, colonies, fleets, etc. Sometimes if you're just hemorrhaging money, this can be helpful to see where most of it's going, because in some cases you're not really even aware how much you're spending. And see, since we're the vassal of Poland, we actually pay part of our income to them, which is shown here, for instance. Loans, you can take out loans up to 5 before you go bankrupt. We don't have any outstanding debt, but if we did, it would be shown here. The interest rate, the amount when it expires, who we borrowed from. Centers of trade, this is one of the most useful pages, I think. If you're playing a country like a merchant republic whose success is greatly dependent upon their market share, it's useful to sort centers of trade by their value. You can see the red text here means it's out of the trade range or you're embargoed by that country. But generally it's best to fill the most valuable centers of trade that you have access to. And you can see, the cost to send an individual merchant, their success chance, how many merchants are on their way, and then how stagnant that center of trade is. At a certain technology level, it's possible to monopolize a center of trade, and that changes the mechanics of how the merchants actually compete. If a country is a monopolist, you will see them listed here. And then you can also prioritize auto-sending of merchants. Income, this is just a line graph of that. Inflation likewise, trade goods. As I said in the first video, the values of all goods in the game will fluctuate. Their prices will appreciate and depreciate. Historically, appreciating goods like sugar or coffee, colonial goods, those tend to increase. There is a scripted modifier for that, I believe, as time passes to simulate the growing taste that, the rising affluence of Europe had for these new commodities. The prices will increase, but other goods like wheat, for instance, their supply and demand is directly correlated to the number of units being constructed and standing in the world. So there is a fairly dynamic, real supply and demand at play for a lot of these things as well. It's actually fascinating to keep an eye on some of these things. In fact, you can also see a breakdown of... is that the same? Yeah, okay. Hovering over the good, you can see the relative market share of where most of that comes from. Like civil service, for instance, only the largest cities in the game produce that, and that represents like the bureaucratic machinery of a large city. And in 1356, there were only a few truly large metropolises in the world, and so that good is highly... actually, that's not a good example because civil service is a direct source of money like gold, so actually that's a bad example, but you can see the breakdown of who produces this. So cinnamon, for instance, both of those provinces are on the island of Sri Lanka, I believe. As in the real world, cinnamon is only grown there, but you can see which provinces generate the full supply of that good. And as, of course, the basic principle of economics, as supply is constant and demand increases, price will increase. As demand is constant, supply increases, price will decrease, etc. So that is modeled in the game, and as prices rise and fall, so too do the production and trade values of those who produce and trade them rise and fall. So this is useful to keep an eye on. Strategic goods, as you control a certain amount of certain goods, they will actually confer an effect upon your nation after you control enough of them. I don't have many of these memorized, but as you produce and trade enough of them, you'll get a modifier that will tell you. So for instance, if you produce the most chocolate in the world, you will get a stability cost modifier reduction. And I can't remember if they're the same. If you trade the most of a certain good, you will also get a separate but similar effect. And this is listed here. Friendly relations. This is very important. This is a list of all your diplomatic ties. The main country overview, I prefer that, but if you want a more graphical representation of that, this is a good place to go. We can see that Poland is our overlord. They're our feudal liege, and we are their vassal, so we can see that here. We're not allied with them, we don't have a royal marriage with them, but if we did, you would see a corresponding check mark under each respective category. Same with hostile relations. You can see which countries have a casus belli, or we have a casus belli against. Again, as a vassal state, we can't actually declare wars. Only the sovereign lord has that authority. But if we could, we still have the right to attack Lithuania. And then we can see countries that have a casus belli, which is Latin for justification for war, against us, and that is actually Poland. While they are our liege, they can't actually attack us, but they could cancel their vassal relationship and attack us anyway, which might be exactly what they end up doing. But we can see that they have a casus belli against us, and it's very important to keep an eye on who does, because the AI is fairly opportunistic and they will typically take a chance if they have a good one. We can see truces. When a state of war ends between countries, there's a 5-year period wherein you are in a state of truce. Interestingly, truce does not actually prevent another war, but if you were to enter a state of war with the country you have a truce with, which is for that 5-year period, there will be a massive -5 stability hit. So you technically can attack someone you have a truce with, but it comes at an enormous stability cost. So in most cases, that is never the better choice, but you do have the option. And then we can see which casus belli we specifically have against Lithuania, and that is Holy War. They are Baltic pagans and we are Catholics, so we have the right to go bring them into the fold of the true faith. And I believe that's the last page of the ledger. Nope, okay. Yes, current wars. This is also very important. You can see every war in the entire world, who initiated it, what it's called, and the score. A positive score favors the attacker, a negative score favors the defender. Generally, it's a good idea to keep an eye on this. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the majority of the game's interface. I was not expecting that to take me well over an hour, but hopefully now as you follow along, it's easier to see what's going on. If you have specific questions, please let me know. I'm not an expert at this game. I have played it a very long time, but this game has existed for a long time as well, and they've made several changes to it. So some of my experiential knowledge is dated and based upon previous versions that aren't applicable anymore. So now let's take a look at some of the strategic challenges we'll be facing as a very threatened tiny country surrounded by these powerful giants. I don't believe we'll actually start playing in this segment, but we should be able to get through a lot of the analysis of our situation, and maybe we'll make a few of our starting decisions before we let time roll. Okay, so a good idea in every campaign is to click on your provinces, see what they produce, get a feel for your economic potential as well as your diplomatic situation. So we can see our capital province here of, if anyone in the audience is Polish or understands how Polish is pronounced, I will, in respect of you, not go ahead and try to butcher that, but Rauski, I guess. That's our capital. You can see by this crown. And then the wider crown around that means it's our national focus. And the national focus gives us the effects you see in this tooltip here. We'll leave that there for now. But we can see that we have a base tax of 10, which is fairly good, I believe. in the base game, the average tax base for the world, or base tax, is 6. So typically things less than 6 are on the poor side of the fence, and above 6 are on the wealthier side. 10 is actually quite good, especially for this region. As you can see, 7, 9, 4, 4, 5, 5. Okay, this region's not as bad as I was expecting. But 10 is quite good. If you are playing, say, here, Turov 3, 3, 4, 7, there are poorer regions where you would expect to see 3s and 4s for the most part. I suppose this kind of Eastern Central Europe is not quite as poor as I was expecting. But also bear in mind, wealth is a function of production as well as tax. So even if you have a low taxation level, if you produce a valuable good, that province's actual income total might still be high. Base tax is still typically the best measurement of that. Okay, so we produce, so base 10 and base 6, that's also not bad. And as we saw on the pie chart on the ledger, we produce hemp. And that is not a bad commodity, a price of 10.6. And let's see. Fort level 2s. I had said in the first video Fort level 1. That's actually not true. Fort level 1 is by default. The actually first constructed fort makes it a level 2. The way the interface counts that is different than the base game. Okay, and let's review one more time. We have a truce with the Blue Horde. It doesn't really matter, we're not neighbors with them. We are a vassal of Poland, that's highly important. We have the CV on them, we can't use it. We're on Poland's sphere of influence, and we have a mission to improve our prestige. Our starting advisor sucked, as we saw. And since we're a vassal, unless Poland cancels the lord-vassal relationship, they can't attack us. So, even though you pay a manorial due to your liege lord, you enjoy their protection, and so sometimes it makes the most sense if you're still in an economically profitable situation to sit on that and accrue funds, which is probably going to be the best thing to do for us for a little while. Wait until Poland gets in a threatened position and then try to make our break with them, because we, without siphoning any of our money into the treasury, make 24 ducats every year on the balance, which is actually pretty good. So that's probably going to be a good way to go. And sometimes you can't really discern the diplomatic trajectory of your country until you let a day roll, because on the first day there tend to be an enormous number of wars as the AI attacks all of its respective neighbors that it's going to fight. They do that on the first day. So there's sort of a gamey, historically implausible spout of war that happens immediately. And it's best to wait until that actually transpires to make a lot of your long-range diplomatic decisions. Okay, so our maximum manpower is 7,600. We have a ways to go on that. A little more. Stability of 2. Okay. Alright, let's see. Trade. Our indigenous center of trade. We have a fairly good chance, and one other comment on trade. There are a maximum of 20 slots in every center of trade. As you can see, there are only 5, 6. Okay, so there are 4 merchants that Poland has, and 5 other merchants. This tier 1 means there's 1 merchant from Hungary, 1 from us, 1 from Plock, 1 from the Teutonic Order, and 1 from Brandenburg, 4 from Poland, and that leaves 11 left. This 71% chance is the chance that they will actually enter the market at all. And then if there are no free slots left, which after the very beginning of the game becomes the norm, once the merchant makes it in the center of trade, they have to succeed there in the first place. So by way of example, we'd have to win the 71.5% raffle, and then if there were no free slots, the game would randomly choose another merchant and to compete against them. And relative to every other merchant, you have a chance of successfully competing them away. And if you win the second raffle, your merchant takes their place and they get kicked out, and their country will have to spend the 5.62 or whatever it is for them to send another merchant back in and continue competing. As centers of trade become more valuable, competition is greater, and they can be points of a lot of tension, because if everyone's competing, your merchant, even if it succeeds, probably won't stay there for very long. So it can also make more sense to avoid the most lucrative ones and instead send them to the ones that aren't on the front of the newspaper, so to speak, so that if they succeed, they'll get to actually stay there for longer, siphon off more wealth to your land, and you won't have to repeat the sunk cost of sending them in the first place. We have two. It actually, since we have plenty of money right now, and we have such a high chance, it actually makes plenty of sense to go ahead and send our two merchants here while there are free slots. And the geographic distance from your capital determines when they will arrive. This will take 3 months, it looks like. So on April 10th, they'll arrive. Both of them will be tested against this 71.5% number, and if they succeed, they will join slot 3 because we already have a merchant here. Even though this says value of our trade 0, that's just because no time has transpired, so it actually hasn't calculated our share yet. Okay. Pardon me. Another first move I would do is let's sign a royal marriage with Poland. This will tie our lands closer together. If they attack us with a royal marriage, they will incur a stability hit of -1. This will also boost our relations in the meantime. Our army of 3,000, we have a force limit of 6. One of the largest considerations the AI makes when choosing whether or not to attack you, besides the immediate diplomatic ramifications of who you're allied with, the size of your standing army is your best immune system. So we have 5,000 men we can draw from our manpower pool right now, and we can only build 2 at a time because we only have 2 provinces. But we have no cavalry, so let's go ahead and fix that. If you don't have cavalry, you're, without getting into the specifics of combat, which we'll explain at some point, you will suffer a penalty in combat. So let's go ahead and train 2 units of cavalry. Now it is January, so you incur a monthly expense. For us right now, this is pretty negligible, but you want to keep an eye on making sure you have enough money in the bank such that you don't incur a negative balance before January, which is when you receive your census tax money, which as we see is 28.24. But let's go ahead and get some cavalry in our army. Now it would be a good idea to look at our domestic policies. This is fairly poor. Some small nations start with advantageous slider positions. This isn't terrible. We can kind of choose our course on these bottom 3. We're putting smack dab in the middle. But decentralized is generally worse. Aristocracy is generally worse. Serfdom is generally worse. But sometimes it makes more sense to move in different directions later or earlier in the game, because you will incur penalties for doing so. For instance, Centralization is almost always a costly endeavor. You're pretty much guaranteed to have revolts for every single click in that direction you go. We can see the the game did change. This mod changed it, I forget. But we can see at the bottom here the odds of what is likely to happen if we move in this direction. We'll take a stability hit, 20% chance. A large revolt, 20% chance, and that's something that would be very unwise to risk right now because we only have 3,000 men, and if we have a revolt of say 5,000 or 6,000, we actually can't defeat that. So, and that rebel army that spawns, if they succeed, they will actually roll back the reforms and will probably lose centralization. A pretender rising, same story, some aristocratic pretender will likely not be able to defeat, or 40% chance of nothing. Moving towards centralization is almost always going to improve your country on the sum of things, but it's not a good idea unless you're in a position, a stable and strong position where you can deal with large revolts. Aristocracy makes the most sense to leave alone right now, I think. Plutocracy lends itself to trade and also spies. You want to make sure you're generating spies, and we do because of our ruler's administrative skill. But aside from that, moving in this direction is helpful for trade, which we're so far over here it doesn't make very much sense to move the other way. This tick here also, because we're a feudal duchy, we can't really cease to be more aristocratic than not. So if you exceed this line, you won't be able to change these policy sliders again for, I believe, double the time it normally takes. So you really want to observe this. And since this is still on the aristocratic side of the fence, we're really... It's pretty costly to move completely the other way because you start losing advantages that you have glacially. And before you really gain anything on this side, you have to reduce everything on this side, which is quite costly. Serfdom. Take a morale penalty. That's fine for now. I personally am a fan of innovative. It reduces your technology cost quite a bit. At the cost of basically losing favor with the Pope and not being able to convert lands you conquer. I'm a fan of the ecumenism national idea. So that should be in culture, yeah. Tolerance of heretics +4. If you have this and you control land that's Protestant in the Reformation, it doesn't matter. You don't need to convert them. I like this idea, so I'm a fan of going innovative myself. We might end up doing that. Mercantilism affects compete chance in provinces, centers of trade that you control. We are long away from controlling any center of trade, so that's not really going to do us any favors, but yeah, it's really not. But if you do control the center of trade, this can be an excellent policy choice because it's very hard for other people to outcompete you when you control the center of trade you'd be sending merchants to. Offensive and defensive, these are schools of thought within military tactics. Going offensive gives you cheaper infantry, cheaper artillery, better leader stats, but it reduces fort defense, and basically defensive is the opposite. Plus or minus a couple other things. Land versus naval, we're going to want to be highly land-oriented for obvious reasons. Quality versus quantity, this one I'm a little divided on. Typically I like quality, the discipline bonus. It does reduce your manpower, and it makes your units more expensive, but the manpower thresholds of this region are pretty high anyway, and this one is also generally a fairly safe direction to move. You don't have revolts. You don't really... There's also not a stability cost penalty, so we might end up doing that because it's a safe direction to move in. Isolationism versus expansionism. pretty good, actually. I like expansionism. Okay. Secularism versus theocracy. I think we're going to move towards quality. It doesn't make sense to risk a revolt for any reason right now. And frankly, I like having high discipline, so let's hope we get the new commandant. Nope, okay. And there is a stability hit option. Okay. So we lost a stability for that. Here's one example. If you're playing a large nation, doing something like this can actually be a 2 or 3 year long mistake to recover from. Well, not necessarily a mistake, but a penalty that you have to dig yourself out of. So we lost the stability for that, but we gained 4 discipline and also 0.25 morale to our armies, so our fighting prowess is going to be greater. Of course, against Poland, that hardly matters. We would not win against them, but it's best to get the ball moving in the right direction early on, I think. So we can see now our discipline is at 107%, which means that our units basically fight with a 7% bonus. And we got that morale improvement as well. So now the maximum is 3.53. Since we expect to be at peace for a while, if I had more money, I would probably take some of these cultural decisions that improve cultural tradition, but, well, let's see. 10. I'm going to wait a year and see which advisors don't get hired. The only point of cultural tradition is making better advisors available. And as I explained in the first video, if you just simply wait 1 year and pause, literally every advisor within your trade range, I believe, that didn't get hired is available to you. So that's a cheaper way to go. We'll just have to remember to do that. Okay, you can also cancel your missions. You take a prestige penalty for doing this, but if you know that you're likely to get a free casus belli in a mission, sometimes it makes sense to go ahead and cancel something that would take a long time to fulfill simply to get that. In our case, that wouldn't be a good idea because we can't declare war anyway, and these cultural decisions will probably improve our prestige as well. Some of them do that. Yeah, actually, there's only a chance of doing so if we arrange a festival, but we'll leave this mission the same for now. I think this is a good stopping place. The next segment, I will go ahead and detail. We'll look at some of our neighbors and what they're likely to do, and then let a day roll and see what actually happens. But we made a couple of decisions here, and now you should have a basic sense of what this game is about and the major concepts at play. A lot of the individual mechanics haven't been explained, but for the purpose of an introduction, I think I've gone far enough. But hope to see you along next time, and we will go ahead and begin the next step of what is hopefully a long and prosperous journey as Mazovia.